Sometimes the punishment for abandoning your family is not losing your money. It is walking into a room years later and discovering that another man became the husband and father you refused to be. Stay with this story, because the final choice made inside an Atlanta boardroom will prove that success can replace a fortune, but it cannot return the years a parent willingly surrendered. And if you believe loyalty, family, and second chances still matter, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you are listening from. Now, let us begin on the morning Daniel Carter came asking for a future from the woman whose future he once tried to destroy. Rain had washed the summer dust from downtown Atlanta, leaving the windows of Harrison Global bright enough to reflect the clouds. Daniel stood beneath the glass entrance with a leather portfolio in one hand and the last expensive suit he still owned fitted carefully across his shoulders. 5 years earlier, magazines had described him as a fearless developer with a gift for turning neglected property into gold. 3 years earlier, one reckless acquisition had buried his company beneath debt. By the time the banks finished, Carter Development existed only in archived articles and court filings. He had applied for director of regional operations because the position offered what he needed most: credibility, stability, and a way back into rooms where people still spoke his name with respect. The recruiter had told him that the final interview would be conducted by an independent executive committee. Daniel had studied Harrison Global's annual reports for a week. He knew the company's chairman, Ethan Harrison, had built a reputation for disciplined growth, employee loyalty, and an almost irritating refusal to chase flashy deals. What Daniel did not know was who had helped Ethan build that culture. The receptionist checked his identification and gave him a visitor badge. "The committee will meet you on the 41st floor. They're finishing a governance meeting now." Daniel thanked her and entered the elevator. As the numbers rose, he repeated the phrases he had prepared: operational recovery, accountability, measured risk, lessons learned. He had spent years learning to describe failure without sounding defeated. The elevator opened into a quiet executive lobby. Several board members emerged from a conference room, followed by Ethan Harrison. He was taller than Daniel expected, dressed in a navy suit that looked expensive without demanding attention. People greeted him with the ease reserved for leaders they respected rather than feared. Then a woman stepped out beside him. Daniel's hand loosened around his portfolio. Naomi Brooks Harrison wore a cream jacket over a dark blue dress. Her natural curls framed a face he had once known in Every Season, laughing across a kitchen table, sleeping beside an unfinished business plan, crying silently when he came home too late. She looked older now, though not tired. Her posture carried the calm certainty of someone who no longer asked permission to occupy a room. A brass plaque beside the conference doors read, "Naomi Harrison, Chief Operating Officer." Daniel felt the air leave his lungs. Naomi saw him. Surprise crossed her face for less than a second, followed by recognition and then control. She did not look frightened. She did not look angry. She simply turned to the general counsel walking beside her. "I need to disclose a conflict," she said quietly. "Mr. Carter and I were previously married. I will not participate in his interview or hiring decision." The attorney nodded immediately. "Thank you. We'll document your recusal." Ethan's eyes moved from Naomi to Daniel. He placed no possessive hand on her shoulder and made no public display. He only asked, "Are you all right?" "I am," she answered. The process should remain independent. That sentence hurt Daniel more than anger would have. 5 years ago, Naomi had begged him to treat their marriage as something more than an inconvenience. Today she protected the fairness of a process that might benefit him. A small voice called from the hallway. "Mom, I found the airplane." A boy of about 4.5 ran from the family lounge carrying a paper airplane marked with blue stars. His dark curls bounced as he hurried toward Naomi. Ethan crouched and caught him before he collided with a table. "Slow down, Captain," Ethan said. The boy laughed. "Dad, you said it would fly farther if I fixed the wings." "Dad." Daniel stared at the child's brown eyes, the familiar line of his eyebrows, and the small dimpled Daniel had seen in photographs of himself at the same age. Naomi rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Isaiah, this is Mr. Carter. He has a meeting here today." Isaiah offered the polite smile of a child taught to greet adults. "Hello, Mr. Carter." Daniel opened his mouth, but the word son would not come. Ethan guided Isaiah back toward the family lounge. Naomi remained only long enough to speak to the general counsel. Please send me written confirmation that I have no role in the decision. Then she looked at Daniel one final time. There was no triumph in her eyes, only distance. As she walked away, Daniel understood that he had not entered Harrison Global merely to interview for a job. He had entered the life Naomi built after he left her standing 7 months pregnant beside a set of divorce papers. 5 years earlier, the Carter penthouse overlooked Atlanta like a monument to ambition. Marble floors reflected the city lights. Art chosen by a designer covered the walls. A grand piano stood untouched beside windows 40 stories above the street. Daniel loved the apartment because every surface announced that he had escaped the cramped neighborhood where he grew up. Naomi had once loved it because Daniel was there. By the 7th month of her pregnancy, the penthouse felt more like a waiting room. She waited for him to come home, waited for him to attend appointments, waited for him to ask about the baby without being reminded. On the night everything ended, she had prepared salmon, vegetables, and the lemon cake he once requested for every birthday. The food cooled while rain pressed against the windows. Daniel arrived at 10 carrying a black legal folder. Naomi noticed the law firm's name before he said anything. What is that? A petition for divorce, he answered. My attorney filed it this afternoon. You'll be formally served tomorrow. She pressed one hand beneath her stomach. You filed without speaking to me. I have been thinking about it for months. We are having a child in 8 weeks. That is why we need to settle things now. His tone was the same one he used when explaining a construction delay. Naomi stared at him, searching for the man who had once worked beside her at a borrowed kitchen table, promising that success would give them more time together. Daniel placed another envelope on the counter. There is a proposed temporary agreement. It covers an apartment, medical expenses, and monthly support while the case is pending. You already chose an apartment for me? I thought it would make the transition easier. You thought removing me from my home would be easy because you paid a deposit? Daniel's jaw tightened. The penthouse is owned through the company. The board does not want personal uncertainty affecting the refinancing. Naomi finally understood. He was not only leaving her. He was trying to move her out before investors noticed his private life was collapsing. You cannot order me to leave tomorrow, she said. My attorney believes. Your attorney represents you. The strength in her own voice surprised her. She picked up her phone and called the family law attorney who had once helped a nonprofit where Naomi worked. The lawyer answered on the 3rd ring. Naomi explained that a divorce action had been filed, that she was pregnant, and that her husband expected her to leave immediately. The attorney's response was calm. Do not sign anything tonight. Do not move because he demands it. We will review the petition, the property arrangements, temporary support, health insurance, and the child-related issues. If you choose to leave for your peace or safety, that will be your decision, not an order from him. Daniel looked away. Naomi ended the call and closed the legal folder. I will respond through counsel. He exhaled with frustration. Why make this difficult? Because our marriage, our home, and our child are not items you can clear from a balance sheet. For the first time that evening, Daniel's confidence cracked. But only for a moment. I cannot build an international company while being pulled into doctor visits, childcare, and domestic expectations, he said. I wanted a family when life was simpler. Reality changed. Naomi felt the baby move. She looked down at the curve of her stomach, then back at the man she had defended to everyone who warned her that ambition had hardened him. No, she said quietly. Reality revealed you. She did not leave that night. Over the next 2 weeks, attorneys arranged temporary financial support, continued medical coverage, and a voluntary move to an apartment Naomi selected herself. The court case did not end because Daniel placed papers on a table. There were disclosures, negotiations, and formal orders. Because the child would be born before the divorce became final, the lawyers also addressed paternity, child support, and Daniel's legal responsibilities. Naomi moved only after the temporary agreement was signed. She took her clothes, family photographs, prenatal records, and the crib her sister had helped her buy before she passed away. Daniel remained in the penthouse, surrounded by everything he believed he had protected. The first court conference took place in a Plain County courtroom 3 weeks later. There were no marble tables, no private elevators, and no executives waiting for Daniel to speak. He sat beside his attorney while Naomi sat beside hers, both of them facing a judge who had heard hundreds of people insist that their broken marriage was uniquely urgent. The judge reviewed the temporary agreement and asked whether Naomi had signed voluntarily. She answered yes. The order preserved her health insurance through the pregnancy, required Daniel to contribute to uncovered medical costs, and established temporary support while the property issues were examined. The judge reminded both parties that decisions concerning the child would be made according to the child's interests, not the convenience of either parent. Daniel looked uncomfortable when the judge asked whether he intended to participate in prenatal appointments or the birth. "My schedule is unpredictable," he said. "Parenthood is also unpredictable," the judge replied. "You and your counsel should prepare accordingly." Outside the courtroom, Daniel caught up with Naomi near the elevators. "You made me look irresponsible. I answered a question truthfully. You know what this case could do to the refinancing if it becomes public." Naomi studied him. Even now, he feared embarrassment more than loss. "Then perhaps you should stop creating facts you are ashamed for people to know." His mother, Ruth Carter, arrived before Daniel could answer. She had learned of the divorce from a cousin and driven from Macon without calling. Ruth was a retired school secretary who had raised Daniel after his father left. She embraced Naomi carefully, then turned toward her son. "You know what absence does to a child," she said. Daniel's expression hardened. "This is not the same. It is always different to the person walking away." Ruth offered to let Naomi stay with her, but Naomi declined because her doctors and work contacts were in Atlanta. Still, Ruth began calling every Sunday. She attended 2 prenatal appointments, brought groceries, and later became the only member of Daniel's family consistently present in Isaiah's early life. Her kindness did not repair Daniel's choices, but it kept Naomi from believing that abandonment was hereditary. 3 weeks later, Naomi woke before dawn with a tightening pain that did not pass. She called her doctor, who told her to go to the hospital immediately. By the time the ambulance reached her building, the contractions were close and her blood pressure was dangerously high. At Memorial Women's Center, the emergency team did not ask her to prove she could pay before treating her. They examined and stabilized her, called the obstetrician, and prepared for an early delivery. Billing questions would come later. That morning, the only question that mattered was whether mother and child would survive safely. Isaiah was born at 34 weeks, small enough to fit against Naomi's chest like a promise she was afraid to hold too tightly. His cry arrived thin, determined, and beautiful. The nurse asked about the information required for the birth record. Naomi did not dramatically erase Daniel from the form. The hospital and attorneys followed the legal documents applicable to a child born during a marriage. Daniel was notified through counsel, and the final divorce judgment later included child support, medical support, and a parenting framework he could have used if he chose to become involved. He did not come to the hospital. He sent flowers through an assistant and a brief message. "I hope everything went well." Naomi read it once, placed the phone face down, and looked at the incubator where Isaiah slept beneath a knitted blue cap. "Everything did not go well," she whispered. "But we are here." The divorce became final months later. The financial settlement was not a fortune, and Naomi never wanted one. It gave her enough to remain housed while she recovered and searched for work. Child support arrived through the formal system, first on time and later through income withholding when Daniel became inconsistent. The money helped pay for diapers, medical visits, and daycare. It did not replace presence. For 18 months, Naomi measured life in small victories. Isaiah gained weight. His lungs strengthened. He learned to sit, crawl, stand, and laugh whenever she pretended to sneeze. Naomi took temporary administrative work at night and cleaned offices early in the morning because the schedule allowed her to care for him. The weeks after Isaiah came home were harder than Naomi admitted to anyone. He woke every 2 hours, struggled to gain weight, and needed follow-up appointments with a pulmonary specialist. Naomi kept a notebook beside the refrigerator recording every feeding, medication, and bill. Some nights, she cried while washing bottles because exhaustion made even simple tasks feel impossible. Ruth visited on Saturdays and held Isaiah while Naomi slept. A neighborhood church delivered meals without asking whether Naomi belonged to the congregation. The older woman across the hall showed her how to calm a colicky baby by walking slowly beneath the kitchen light. These people did not rescue Naomi. They gave her enough rest to keep rescuing herself. Daniel saw Isaiah for the first and only time before the adoption during a court-scheduled introduction when the baby was 6 months old. He arrived 20 minutes late, held the child stiffly for less than 5 minutes, and asked Naomi whether the meeting could be shortened because an investor was waiting. Isaiah began crying, and Daniel handed him back with visible relief. The parenting coordinator proposed gradual visits that could expand if Daniel attended consistently. He canceled the next 3. After that, he stopped requesting dates. The legal record would later matter, but Naomi did not spend her days collecting evidence for revenge. She kept the messages because her attorney told her to, then returned her attention to the child who was actually in the room. When Isaiah took his first step, Ruth was there. When he said, "Mama," Naomi was alone with him on the living room floor. She recorded the moment on an old phone and watched it after he fell asleep, not because the video was perfect, but because she needed proof that joy could exist beside fear. One Tuesday, while emptying trash in a downtown office tower, she found an elderly maintenance employee struggling beside a fallen cabinet. Client folders covered the floor. "Let me help," she said. Together, they lifted the cabinet. Naomi noticed the files used 3 different coding systems: color for investment type, numbers for quarter, and letters for region. She reorganized them before placing them back. A man in a gray coat stopped nearby. "Who sorted those?" The maintenance employee pointed to Naomi. The stranger looked at the shelves. "Most people would have alphabetized them. That would have destroyed the reporting structure," Naomi said. "The colors separate asset classes. The numbers identify the quarter, and the letters track regional teams." The man smiled. "You saw that from the labels?" It was the only system that made sense. He introduced himself as Ethan Harrison, founder of the firm occupying the building's upper floors. Naomi recognized the name and immediately became self-conscious about the cleaning cart beside her. Ethan did not offer charity. He asked about her experience. Before her marriage, Naomi had managed operations for a housing nonprofit. She had also designed scheduling and vendor systems for Daniel's early developments, work that disappeared behind his name once the company became successful. Ethan handed her a business card. "Our operations department is hiring an assistant coordinator. Apply through human resources. I'll tell them only that I observed you solve a problem. The rest must be your work." Naomi almost did not apply. Then rent increased. Isaiah developed another respiratory infection, and caution became more dangerous than hope. The interview panel asked about process design, conflict resolution, and gaps in her employment. Naomi answered honestly. She did not have a 4-year degree, but she brought work samples from the nonprofit and a detailed explanation of how she had reduced vendor delays at Carter Development before Daniel removed her from the business. Harrison Global hired her as an operations assistant on a 6-month probationary period. She earned every step after that. Naomi completed evening courses in project management and corporate compliance. She learned the company's systems, corrected scheduling failures, and built a vendor review process that reduced late deliveries. She became coordinator, then manager. When a regional expansion stalled because 3 departments were protecting their own budgets, Naomi designed a shared accountability plan and delivered the launch under cost. Ethan praised results publicly and corrected mistakes privately. He never implied that Naomi owed him personal loyalty for the opportunity. As her responsibilities grew, the company placed her under another executive so Ethan would not directly supervise her. That decision mattered later, when friendship began turning into something neither of them wanted to misuse. Isaiah first knew Ethan as the serious man who carried emergency crackers in his desk. He later knew him as the adult who attended the company picnic, repaired a broken dinosaur with too much glue, and listened to a 4-minute explanation of why clouds looked like whales. The relationship between Naomi and Ethan developed over years, not weeks. They met outside work only after Naomi had transferred into a division overseen by the board's operations committee. When they began dating, both disclosed the relationship under company policy. Ethan removed himself from decisions about her compensation and promotion. Naomi's advancement continued through documented performance reviews and independent board approval. By the time Isaiah turned 4, Naomi was senior vice president of operations. She had led 2 regional integrations, improved employee retention, and built a crisis plan that kept hundreds of workers employed during a market downturn. Her most important test came during a winter storm that shut down highways across northern Georgia. A warehouse supplying medical equipment to several hospitals lost power, and Harrison Global's logistics team discovered that backup generators had not been serviced as promised. Senior managers argued over responsibility while temperature-sensitive inventory approached its safety limit. Naomi was still an operations manager, not an executive. She listened for 10 minutes, then drew 3 columns on a whiteboard: protect patients, preserve inventory, document accountability. She located refrigerated trucks from a food distributor, arranged police-approved routes, and divided the staff into teams responsible for transport, hospital communication, and vendor documentation. No one department could claim control, which meant no one department could delay the response to protect itself. The inventory reached the hospitals before it became unusable. The next morning, Ethan found Naomi asleep in a conference chair with Isaiah's preschool drawing folded beside her laptop. "You should have gone home," he said. "So should you. I own the company. That does not make fatigue a strategy." He laughed, then became serious. "You led people who outrank you without embarrassing them. That is rare. I gave them a problem larger than their pride." The board's review later found that Naomi's response prevented millions in losses and protected critical hospital deliveries. She was promoted only after a formal evaluation comparing internal and external candidates. The report cited her crisis leadership, cost controls, and employer retention results. Ethan signed the recommendation, but 4 independent directors approved it. Naomi kept a copy of that report in a drawer, not because she doubted her ability, but because women who have once been told they are burdens sometimes need written evidence that their work changed outcomes. The board later named her chief operating officer because the results were measurable and the choice was unanimous. Ethan proposed at home after burning the garlic bread and overcooking the pasta. He did not kneel in front of cameras. He sat across from Naomi and said, "I do not want to rescue you, and I cannot erase what happened. I want to spend the rest of my life choosing you and Isaiah, even on the ordinary days when no one applauds." Isaiah, listening from the doorway, whispered, "Say yes, Mom." Naomi laughed through tears. "I was planning to." Their wedding was small. Before it took place, attorneys addressed Isaiah's legal future carefully. Daniel had not requested parenting time, attended school events, or met his son. When asked about a future step-parent adoption, he received independent legal advice and eventually signed formal consent. A judge reviewed the petition and approved the adoption after the required process. Only then did Ethan become Isaiah's legal father, as well as the man already doing the work. The adoption hearing occurred on a bright morning in a small courtroom decorated with children's drawings. Isaiah wore a navy jacket and swung his feet beneath the chair while the judge asked Ethan simple questions about school, healthcare, discipline, and what adoption meant to him. "It means the law will recognize the responsibility I already accept every day," Ethan said. "It also means Isaiah will never have to wonder whether I can be taken out of his life by someone else's change of mind." The judge asked Isaiah what he called Ethan. "Dad," the boy replied, "except when he burns dinner. Then Mom calls him Ethan." The courtroom laughed. Naomi covered her face, and even the judge smiled. Daniel did not attend, but his signed consent and acknowledgement of consequences were part of the record. The judge made clear that adoption was not a private promise or a change made by replacing a name on a form. It was a permanent legal order carrying rights, duties, and inheritance consequences. When the judge signed, Ethan did not celebrate as though he had defeated another man. He hugged Isaiah and whispered, "I was your dad before the paper. I will be your dad after it." Naomi understood then why the process mattered. Love had brought them to the courtroom, but law gave the child stability that emotion alone could not guarantee. Daniel's business collapsed for reasons unrelated to Naomi. He had borrowed aggressively, ignored warnings, and guaranteed a development that failed when construction costs rose. Creditors took the company. The penthouse was sold. Friends who once crowded his celebrations stopped answering calls. When Daniel applied to Harrison Global, neither Naomi nor Ethan selected him. The search firm forwarded his resume because his early career contained genuine achievements. The general counsel created an independent panel. Naomi recused herself. Ethan also stepped away from the final vote after the personal connection became clear. Daniel's interview proceeded without humiliation. The committee asked why his company failed, how he handled employee layoffs, and what he had learned about governance. For the first time, he did not blame the market. The independent panel's final interview lasted more than an hour. One director asked Daniel to explain why his previous company's internal controls failed. Another asked how he would respond if a profitable project exposed the company to unacceptable legal or safety risk. Daniel answered better than he would have 5 years earlier. "I would stop the project," he said. Profit does not convert a bad decision into a responsible one. The chairwoman leaned forward. "Would you have said that before your company failed?" "No, what changed?" Daniel considered offering a polished response about experience. Instead, he told the truth. "I lost the people who challenged me. Some left because I drove them away. One was my wife. When no one remained who could tell me no, I called that freedom. It was actually the beginning of collapse." The committee did not reward confession simply because it was painful. They compared references, reviewed litigation connected to his former company, and evaluated whether his recent work showed sustained change. His insight was real, but the role required current experience leading regulated operations at a scale he had not managed since the failure. The rejection email was respectful and specific. It also invited him to apply for a smaller project role after gaining additional experience. For the first time in his career, Daniel did not call the recruiter to argue. "I treated caution as weakness," he said. "I confused control with leadership. When people raised concerns, I removed them instead of listening." The panel appreciated his honesty but chose another candidate whose recent experience better matched the role. Their written decision cited business reasons, not his history with Naomi. Afterward, Daniel waited in the lobby because he was not ready to leave. Naomi approached alone. "You were not part of the decision," he said. "No, you could have made sure I never entered the building. That would have made me more like the person you were." He looked toward the family lounge where Ethan helped Isaiah fold another paper airplane. He calls Ethan Dad. Ethan adopted him through the court. "You consented." Daniel lowered his eyes. Years earlier, the consent documents had seemed like one more unpleasant matter for attorneys to finish. Now the meaning stood 10 feet away in a child who did not recognize him. "I told myself I was giving him stability," Daniel said. "You were," Naomi replied. "But do not pretend the decision began with that signature. It began every day you chose not to call, not to visit, and not to know him." Daniel's face tightened. "Did you ever tell him about me?" In a way a child could understand. He knows he had a biological father who was not ready to be a parent and later allowed Ethan to adopt him. When he is older, he can ask more. "I will not teach him hatred, but I will not invent a different history." Isaiah noticed Naomi and waved. "Mom, watch this one." Daniel watched the boy launch the airplane. It sailed across the lobby and landed near his shoes. He picked it up and handed it back. "That flew very far." "Dad fixed the wings," Isaiah said proudly. Daniel managed to smile. "He did a good job." The child ran back to Ethan. Daniel turned to Naomi. "I am sorry." She waited. "I am sorry I left you alone. I am sorry I treated our son like a problem. And I am sorry it took losing everything for me to understand what I had." Naomi nodded once. An apology does not restore the years. But telling the truth can change what you do with the years ahead. Daniel left Harrison Global without the job he wanted, but not without direction. He accepted a lower-level operations position at a regional housing company where no one cared about his former magazine covers. He attended counseling. He learned to listen during meetings. He became the manager who stayed late when younger employees needed help instead of the executive who demanded sacrifice from everyone but himself. He did not ask Naomi to reopen a family that had legally and emotionally moved forward. On Isaiah's birthday, he sent a card through the attorney managing the sealed adoption records, understanding that Naomi and Ethan would decide what was appropriate to preserve for the future. It contained no demand, only a sentence. "I hope the life you built is kinder than the one I offered." Several months after the interview, Daniel received an unexpected call from Ruth. She had fallen while gardening and needed help for a few weeks. Years earlier, he would have sent money and considered the problem solved. This time he drove to Macon, stocked her refrigerator, repaired the loose porch rail, and rearranged his work schedule so he could take her to physical therapy. One evening Ruth found him sitting at the kitchen table looking at a photograph of Isaiah that Naomi had permitted her to keep. "Do you think he will ever want to know me?" Daniel asked. "That is not a question you get to answer for him," Ruth said. "Your responsibility is to become someone who can face whatever answer he gives." Daniel nodded. I used to think an apology was a key. It is not. Sometimes it only proves you finally saw the door. He began volunteering twice a month with a workforce program for men rebuilding careers after bankruptcy and incarceration. He did not tell them he had wisdom. He told them where pride had taken him. When one participant missed a meeting because his daughter was sick, Daniel rescheduled instead of lecturing him about commitment. The change was small enough that no newspaper would report it, but character is often repaired in choices too ordinary to become headlines. Naomi heard about Ruth's injury and sent a meal through a family friend. She did not contact Daniel directly, and he respected the boundary. Ethan never asked her to prove that the past no longer mattered. He understood that compassion and reconciliation were different things. On the anniversary of Isaiah's adoption, the family returned to the courthouse garden and took a photograph beneath a dogwood tree. Isaiah was older, missing one front tooth, and impatient to leave for ice cream. Naomi looked at the picture later and noticed that no one appeared rescued. They simply appeared present. That was the final lesson Daniel had failed to understand when he left. Families are not secured by dramatic promises made at weddings or by checks mailed after damage is done. They are secured by thousands of ordinary decisions. Answering the late-night call, attending the appointment, remembering the school project, listening when the truth is inconvenient, and staying when ambition offers an excuse to disappear. Years later, Daniel would still remember the paper airplane landing at his feet. He had spent his youth believing power meant deciding which people could remain in his life. The boy taught him the opposite. Love was not ownership. Fatherhood was not biology alone. A family was built by the person who kept showing up after the room emptied, the applause ended, and the ordinary work began. Inside Harrison Global, Naomi finished her day and joined Ethan and Isaiah for dinner. Nothing about the evening would appear in a business magazine. Ethan forgot to buy Parmesan. Isaiah complained about broccoli. Naomi laughed when the smoke alarm reacted to garlic bread for the second time in 5 years. It was imperfect, noisy, and complete. Daniel once believed Naomi and the baby would slow his climb. Instead, they became the life that moved forward without him. He could rebuild a career. He could become a better man. But he could not return to the night when a pregnant woman stood beside a legal folder and asked him to remember what mattered. Some fortunes can be recovered. Some reputations can be repaired. Time is the one account that never accepts a late deposit. And that is why Naomi's victory was never Daniel's bankruptcy, the boardroom surprise, or the title outside her office. Her victory was reaching an ordinary evening without fear. It was knowing that Isaiah would grow up seeing disagreement handled without cruelty, work pursued without worship, and love demonstrated without an audience. Daniel's consequence was not that another man stole his place. No one had stolen anything. Ethan accepted a responsibility Daniel repeatedly declined, and Naomi built a home from the choices available to her. The past could explain each of them, but it no longer controlled the family's future. In the end, the most powerful person in the story was not the billionaire, the failed millionaire, or the executive who commanded a boardroom. It was the woman who learned that protecting her dignity did not require revenge, and that moving forward could be both lawful and merciful.